Karen screams at teen in Harris hat, then learns his dad owns the mall. How will this story escalate? To find out, watch the video to the end. But first, please subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications to get more stories like this. It was an ordinary Saturday afternoon at the bustling Westfield Mall. Families wandered through the wide, polished hallways lined with boutiques, while teenagers loitered near the food court, exchanging laughter over overpriced sodas and soft pretzels. Amid the chatter and lively energy, there was one distinct figure who stood out, not because he was seeking attention but because of his simplicity. Jason Harris, a 17-year-old boy with sandy blonde hair, wore his favorite hat, a bold American flag-themed baseball cap with Harris stitched in navy blue across the front. For Jason, the hat was more than a piece of clothing. It symbolized a connection to his father, a man he deeply admired. His dad often wore a similar hat when they spent time together on fishing trips or backyard barbecues. Today, Jason had worn it as a comfort piece, never expecting it to draw the wrong kind of attention. Jason stood outside the electronics store, glancing at his phone while waiting for his best friend, Ryan. He adjusted the strap of his backpack and idly scrolled through his messages. But as he waited, a shrill voice sliced through the background noise of the mall. "What do you think you're doing?" The tone was sharp, accusatory, and seemed aimed directly at him. Jason looked up, startled. Approaching him with quick, aggressive steps was a middle-aged woman with a tightly curled bob and an air of self-righteous indignation. She was the epitome of a modern-day Karen, pearl earrings, an expensive leather purse swinging at her side, and a glare that could cut glass. Jason instinctively took a step back as the woman stopped inches away from him. "I'm talking to you," she snapped, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at his chest. "Why are you standing here like that, looking so smug in that ridiculous hat?" Jason blinked in confusion. "Excuse me?" he asked, his voice calm but uncertain. He wasn't sure what he had done to provoke her. "Don't play dumb with me," the woman barked. "Do you have any idea how offensive that hat is? Walking around here flaunting that name like you're some big shot. You kids have no respect these days." Jason frowned, glancing down at his hat. It was just a cap, a gift from his dad. What could possibly be offensive about it? "Ma'am, I'm not sure what you're talking about," he said carefully, trying to diffuse the tension. "It's just my name." The woman scoffed loudly, attracting the attention of nearby shoppers. A small crowd began to gather, curious about the commotion. Karen's face turned red as she gestured wildly toward Jason. "Don't lie to me," she shouted. "I know exactly what that hat means. You think you're so clever hiding behind that patriotic nonsense. But I'm not buying it." Jason's ears burned as the crowd's murmurs grew louder. He felt the weight of their stares and could sense the judgment in their eyes. He wanted to explain, to tell them that his hat was just a harmless piece of clothing, but the woman didn't give him a chance. "This mall doesn't need people like you causing trouble," Karen declared, her voice rising with every word. "Go back to wherever you came from." Jason's chest tightened. He wasn't a confrontational person by nature, and he certainly hadn't come to the mall looking for a fight. He just wanted to hang out with his friend, maybe grab a burger and check out the latest video games. Now he was the center of an unwarranted spectacle. "Look, ma'am," Jason said, keeping his voice steady despite the lump forming in his throat. "I'm not trying to offend anyone. This is just a hat. My dad gave it to me." Karen's eyes narrowed and she crossed her arms. "Your dad, huh? Well, that explains a lot. I can't believe people like you think you can just—" "Hey lady, what's your problem?" Ryan's voice cut through the noise like a lifeline. Jason turned to see his best friend jogging toward them, a concerned look on his face. Ryan, with his messy brown hair and laid-back demeanor, was the kind of person who couldn't stand injustice, especially when it involved his friends. Karen turned her glare toward Ryan, clearly unamused by his interruption. "Stay out of this," she snapped. "This has nothing to do with you." Ryan ignored her and stepped between her and Jason, his tall frame serving as a shield. "Actually, it does," he said firmly. "You're yelling at my friend over a hat. Don't you have better things to do?" The crowd murmured in agreement, but Karen wasn't ready to back down. "You don't understand," she huffed. "This kind of behavior needs to be called out. If people like him think they can just walk around here without consequences—" "People like him?" Ryan repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You don't even know him. You're making a scene over nothing." Karen's face flushed an even deeper shade of red. She opened her mouth to retort, but before she could, a security guard approached the group, his expression stern. "What's going on here?" the guard asked, glancing between Jason, Ryan, and Karen. Karen immediately launched into an exaggerated explanation. "This boy, she said, pointing at Jason as if he were a criminal, is causing a disturbance. He's being disrespectful and making everyone uncomfortable with that hat. The guard turned to Jason, who stood frozen, unsure of what to say. Is that true? The guard asked. Jason shook his head quickly. No, sir. I was just waiting for my friend. She started yelling at me out of nowhere. The guard studied Jason for a moment before looking back at Karen. Ma'am, if there's no actual disturbance, I suggest you let this go. The mall is a public space. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you serious? She exclaimed. You're just going to let him stand here and... That's enough, the guard interrupted, his tone firm. Move along, ma'am. Karen huffed indignantly but seemed to realize she was out of options. She shot Jason one last withering glare before storming off, muttering under her breath. Jason let out a shaky sigh of relief as the crowd began to disperse. Ryan clapped him on the back, offering a reassuring smile. Don't let her get to you, man, he said. She's just another crazy Karen. But even as the tension eased, Jason couldn't shake the humiliation he felt. He hadn't done anything wrong, yet he had been publicly shamed and judged by a stranger. Little did he know, this incident was just the beginning of a day that would take an unexpected turn. One that would leave the entire mall talking for weeks to come. As the crowd dispersed and the echoes of Karen's tirade faded, Jason remained rooted in place, trying to process what had just happened. His pulse still raced and a hollow ache had settled in his chest. The humiliation of being singled out, accused, and judged publicly was something he wasn't sure he could easily shake off. Ryan, sensing his friend's discomfort, nudged him gently. Hey, come on, man. Let's grab something from the food court. You need to clear your head. Jason nodded, though he wasn't particularly hungry. He followed Ryan through the mall, keeping his head down to avoid any lingering stares from passers-by. The food court was its usual hive of activity. Families gathered around tables piled with trays of fast food, teenagers laughed over milkshakes, and the aroma of fried chicken and pizza filled the air. Ryan grabbed a couple of burgers and drinks, insisting on treating Jason. They found a table near the corner, away from the busiest spots. Jason peeled the wrapper off his burger absent-mindedly, his mind replaying Karen's words over and over. You know she was just a nutcase, right? Ryan said between bites. People like her look for reasons to be mad. It wasn't about you. Jason managed a weak smile. Yeah, I guess. I don't get it. Why would someone make such a big deal over nothing? Ryan shrugged. Because some people have nothing better to do. They sat in silence for a while, the noise of the food court providing a strange sense of normalcy. But Jason couldn't shake the lingering unease. He had always been a quiet, laid-back guy, content to keep his head down and avoid trouble. Today, though, trouble had found him. As they finished their meal, a group of kids from their school passed by, laughing loudly. One of them noticed Jason and stopped short, nudging his friends. Hey, isn't that the kid Karen went off on earlier? He said loudly, pointing at Jason. Jason's face turned crimson as the group erupted into laughter. Man, that was wild, another kid said, shaking his head. She really went after you, huh? Dude, I saw the whole thing, a third kid chimed in. She looked like she was about to explode. Jason forced a laugh, trying to play it cool. Yeah, it was something, he said, wishing they would just leave. The group eventually moved on, but the interaction left Jason feeling even worse. It wasn't just Karen who had humiliated him, it was the fact that everyone seemed to know about it now. He could already imagine the whispers at school on Monday, the jokes at his expense. Let's get out of here, Jason said abruptly, standing up. Ryan didn't argue, sensing his friend's discomfort. They left the food court and wandered aimlessly through the mall, the vibrant displays in store windows doing little to lift Jason's spirits. As they passed the large fountain in the center of the mall, a familiar voice rang out. There he is. Jason turned to see his older sister, Emily, striding toward him. Emily was 22, confident and outspoken, with a knack for standing up to bullies. She had always been Jason's protector, and today was no different. I heard what happened, Emily said, her eyes narrowing as she glanced around. Where's this Karen? Did she leave already? Jason sighed. Yeah, she's gone. It's fine. Let it go. Emily crossed her arms, her expression firm. It's not fine, Jason. She had no right to treat you like that. You should have called me. Ryan grinned. You know, Emily would have given her a piece of her mind. Jason couldn't help but smile at the thought. Emily was fearless, the kind of person who wouldn't hesitate to call someone out, no matter how intimidating they seemed. I didn't want to make it a bigger deal than it already was, Jason said. People were already staring. Emily's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "Listen, Jason. You didn't do anything wrong, okay? That woman was out of line, not you. Don't let her get to you." Jason nodded, appreciating his sister's support. But even as they continued walking, he couldn't shake the feeling that the day had been irreparably ruined. Meanwhile, in another part of the mall, Karen, still fuming from her confrontation with Jason, was recounting the incident to a group of her friends at a high-end boutique. "Can you believe the audacity?" she said, her voice dripping with indignation. "That kid had the nerve to stand there like he owned the place, wearing that awful hat." One of her friends, a woman named Linda, raised an eyebrow. "What's so bad about the hat? It just said Harris, didn't it?" Karen waved her hand dismissively. "It's the principle, Linda. These kids think they can just do whatever they want with no respect for rules or authority." Another friend, Susan, chimed in. "You know, Karen, maybe you overreacted. He's just a teenager. It's not like he was causing any trouble." Karen scoffed. "Of course you'd say that, Susan. You're always defending these brats. But someone has to teach them a lesson." Linda and Susan exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with Karen's tirade. But before they could respond, a voice interrupted their conversation. "Excuse me, ladies," the boutique manager said politely, her smile tight. "Could you please keep your voices down? We're trying to maintain a pleasant atmosphere for our other customers." Karen's face turned red, but she nodded stiffly. "Of course," she said through gritted teeth. As the manager walked away, Karen muttered under her breath, "Can't anyone take a little criticism these days?" Back at the fountain, Jason, Ryan, and Emily sat on the edge of the fountain, trying to decide what to do next. Jason was about to suggest heading home when a man in a crisp suit approached them. He was tall and imposing, with a confident stride that commanded attention. "Excuse me," the man said, his voice deep and authoritative. "Are you Jason Harris?" Jason blinked, taken aback. Yeah, that's me." The man extended his hand. "My name is Mr. Coleman. I work for the Harris Group." Jason's heart skipped a beat. The Harris Group was his father's company, a real estate empire that owned several properties, including the very mall they were standing in. He had grown up hearing about the company's ventures but had never been directly involved. "What's going on?" Jason asked, shaking Mr. Coleman's hand. "I was informed about an incident involving you earlier," Mr. Coleman said. "Your father wanted me to check in and make sure you're okay." Jason's cheeks flushed. The last thing he wanted was for his dad to get involved. "I'm fine," he said quickly. "It's no big deal." Mr. Coleman smiled kindly. "I'm glad to hear that. But your father doesn't take these matters lightly. He wants to ensure that everyone feels welcome and respected in his establishments." Jason glanced at Emily, who gave him an encouraging nod. He couldn't deny that it felt good to know his dad cared, even if he wished the situation hadn't escalated to this point. "Thanks," Jason said, his voice steady. "I appreciate it." Mr. Coleman nodded. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to let us know." As Mr. Coleman walked away, Jason felt a newfound sense of resolve. He wasn't just a random kid in a hat, he was part of something bigger. And if Karen thought she could bully him without consequences, she was about to learn a very important lesson. Karen strutted through the mall with a sense of self-assuredness that bordered on arrogance. She had always carried herself this way, certain that she was right in any situation. The earlier encounter with Jason and his harassed hat was, to her, just another example of her standing up for what she believed was proper conduct. She had spun the incident in her mind, convincing herself that Jason's casual attitude and bold fashion choice were symbols of youthful disrespect that needed correcting. "Can you believe that boy? The nerve of him," Karen muttered to herself as she wandered into an upscale jewelry store. She pretended to browse the sparkling display cases, though she wasn't really shopping. Karen liked being in places like this because they reinforced the image she wanted to project. Poised, classy, and better than everyone else. Behind the counter, the sales associate, a younger woman with sharp eyes, observed Karen's every move. It wasn't unusual for Karen to frequent the store, though she rarely made any purchases. The staff had long since caught on to her tendency to loiter and make lofty demands, often ending in criticism of their customer service. Today, however, the associate noticed something different about Karen. Her face was flushed, and she muttered under her breath, still clearly agitated from her earlier outburst. "Can I help you with something, ma'am?" the associate asked, keeping her tone polite but distant. Karen waved her off dismissively. "Just looking," she said curtly before resuming her perusal of the sparkling jewelry. Across the mall, Jason sat with Emily and Ryan at the edge of the fountain. His mood had improved slightly since the arrival of Mr. Coleman, but he was still processing the events of the day. It wasn't every day that a complete stranger decided to publicly berate him for no reason. The experience had left a bitter taste in his mouth. "You know what's funny?" Emily said, breaking the silence. "People like her always think they're untouchable. They never imagine that their actions could have consequences." Jason sighed. "I don't want to get into it with her though. What's the point? She probably won't even remember me tomorrow." Emily raised an eyebrow. "Oh, she'll remember you all right. Trust me. People like that don't forget when their ego takes a hit." Ryan chuckled. "If Emily's involved, I'm betting Karen's about to have the worst day of her life." Jason looked at his sister, a hint of curiosity in his eyes. "What are you planning, Em?" Emily grinned mischievously. "Nothing illegal, don't worry. Just a little reminder that she messed with the wrong person." Meanwhile, in the boutique, Karen continued to browse the jewelry, occasionally picking up a piece to examine it closely before placing it back with a faint scoff. "Nothing here is worth the price they're asking," she muttered, loud enough for the sales associate to hear. The associate forced a smile. "Our collection is curated from some of the finest designers, ma'am. If you're looking for something specific, I'd be happy to assist you." Karen ignored the offer, her attention drawn to a large diamond necklace displayed prominently at the center of the store. "How much for that one?" she asked, pointing to the piece. The associate walked over to the display case and retrieved the necklace, placing it carefully on the counter. "This is one of our most exquisite pieces," she said. "The price is $18,000. Karen's eyes widened slightly, though she quickly masked her surprise with a haughty expression. "$18,000? For that? It's not even that impressive." The associate maintained her professional demeanor. "It's a handcrafted piece with conflict-free diamonds. The craftsmanship is unmatched." Karen leaned closer, scrutinizing the necklace as if searching for flaws. "I've seen better," she said dismissively. "And for half the price." Before the associate could respond, another customer entered the store, a man in a tailored suit, carrying himself with the quiet confidence of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted. Karen glanced at him briefly, noting his expensive attire, before turning her attention back to the necklace. The man approached the counter, his eyes scanning the display cases. When he spotted Karen, he paused, a flicker of recognition crossing his face. "Excuse me," he said, addressing the sales associate. "Is that woman's last name Karen?" The associate blinked in surprise. "I'm sorry, sir. We don't disclose customer information." Karen looked up, her brow furrowing. "And who are you?" she demanded, her tone dripping with condescension. The man smiled faintly, his expression unreadable. "Just someone who heard about an incident earlier today. You wouldn't happen to know a young man named Jason Harris, would you?" At the mention of Jason's name, Karen's posture stiffened. "What business is it of yours?" The man tilted his head, his smile widening slightly. "Oh, it's very much my business. You see, I happen to work for his father. And I have a feeling he'd be very interested to hear how you treated his son." Karen's face turned pale. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. The sales associate watched the exchange with growing interest, though she kept her expression neutral. I didn't know who he was," Karen stammered finally. "It was a misunderstanding." The man raised an eyebrow. "A misunderstanding? From what I heard, you went out of your way to humiliate him. Is that your idea of a misunderstanding?" Karen's hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. "I didn't mean any harm," she said weakly. "It was just he was being disrespectful." The man's smile disappeared, replaced by a stern expression. "Let me make something clear. Jason Harris is one of the kindest, most respectful young men I've ever met. If you think for a second that your behavior was justified, you're sorely mistaken." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. The realization of who she had crossed was sinking in fast, and for the first time that day she felt a flicker of regret. Back at the fountain, Jason, Emily and Ryan had decided to take a stroll through the mall to pass the time. As they walked past the jewelry store, Emily spotted Karen through the glass doors, her face a mixture of indignation and fear as she spoke to the man in the suit. "Looks like she's getting a taste of her own medicine," Emily said with a smirk. Jason glanced at the scene but didn't stop. "Let's just keep going. I don't want to make this a bigger deal than it already is." Ryan, however, couldn't resist snapping a quick photo of Karen's flustered expression. "For posterity," he said with a grin. As they continued through the mall, Jason couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Karen had spent the entire day trying to make him feel small, but in the end, her actions had backfired spectacularly. For the first time since the incident, he felt like he could hold his head high again. Karen's hands shook as she clutched her purse, her eyes darting toward the man in the suit, who now loomed over her with a quiet yet imposing presence. The jewelry store felt suffocatingly small, and the weight of the other customers' curious glances bore down on her like a spotlight. I didn't know, Karen stammered again, her voice barely above a whisper. If I had known he was the son of someone important, I never would have. Ah, there it is, the man interrupted, raising a hand to silence her. The truth. You only care because you think he's important? His voice was calm, yet it cut through the tension like a blade. What about every other person you've treated this way? Are they less deserving of respect because they don't have a powerful father? Karen's lips parted in protest, but no words came out. She had never been challenged like this before, not by someone who had the upper hand. I've met people like you before, the man continued, his tone sharpening. You think the world owes you something. You think you're entitled to treat others however you please because no one's ever held you accountable. Well, today is different. The other customers in the store who had been pretending to browse, now openly stared. The sales associate, who had initially been neutral, allowed a small, satisfied smile to creep onto her face. Karen, so accustomed to being the center of attention on her terms, now felt exposed and vulnerable. I didn't mean anything by it, Karen blurted, her voice rising in desperation. It was just a misunderstanding. I was just... Enough, the man said firmly, cutting her off. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a sleek business card, which he placed on the counter in front of her. If you have any further complaints, feel free to take it up with Mr. Harris directly. Karen stared at the card as though it were a live grenade. The name on it confirmed her worst fears. Daniel Harris, owner of the very mall she was standing in. The man in front of her wasn't just an employee, he was one of the key decision-makers in Jason's father's business empire. I suggest you leave before this gets any worse for you, Daniel said, his voice icy. And consider this a warning. The next time you decide to berate someone, remember that their worth isn't determined by the name on their hat. Karen grabbed her purse and bolted from the store, her face flushed with humiliation. The moment she stepped into the mall corridor, she felt the weight of the stares from passers-by who had heard the commotion. Her instinct was to escape, to find a place where she could collect herself, but the mall felt like a labyrinth of judgmental eyes. Meanwhile, Jason, Emily, and Ryan had made their way to a nearby food court. They sat at a corner table, their earlier encounter with Karen now a topic of casual conversation. Do you think she's learned her lesson? Ryan asked, sipping his soda. Emily smirked. People like her don't change overnight. But at least she knows she can't get away with it anymore. Jason, who had been quiet for most of the discussion, finally spoke up. I don't know. I mean, I'm glad she got called out, but I don't want to become the kind of person who enjoys watching others get humiliated. Emily raised an eyebrow. You're a better person than most, Jace. But don't forget, you didn't start this. She did. Before Jason could respond, a familiar figure appeared at the edge of the food court. It was Daniel, his sharp suit and confident stride making him stand out among the crowd. He spotted the trio and walked over, his expression softening as he approached. Jason, Daniel said warmly, extending a hand. Good to see you. Jason stood and shook Daniel's hand, a mixture of surprise and relief on his face. Mr. Coleman. I didn't expect to see you here. Call me Daniel, the man replied with a smile. And I couldn't leave without making sure you were okay. Your father would never forgive me if I didn't check in. Jason chuckled nervously. I'm fine. Really? Daniel's gaze shifted to Emily and Ryan. And you two must be Jason's famous sister and best friend. I've heard a lot about you. Emily grinned. All good things, I hope. Of course, Daniel said, taking a seat across from them. I just had a rather enlightening conversation with someone you might remember from earlier. A certain Karen. Jason's eyes widened. You talked to her? Let's just say she won't be causing any more trouble in this mall, Daniel said, his tone reassuring. But more importantly, I wanted to talk to you about something. Jason leaned forward, curious. What is it? Daniel paused as though choosing his words carefully. Your father and I have been discussing ways to improve the culture of this mall. People like Karen are a symptom of a larger problem, a lack of kindness and understanding. We want to change that and we think you can help. Jason blinked in surprise. Me? How? We're creating a new initiative to promote inclusivity and respect within the mall, Daniel explained. We want to start by featuring a series of community events, and we'd like you to be the face of the campaign. Emily clapped her hands together. Jason, that's amazing. Jason hesitated. I don't know. I mean, I'm not exactly the most confident person. What if I mess it up? Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Jason's shoulder. You won't. You've already proven that you have the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult. That's exactly the kind of leadership we need. Jason looked at his sister and best friend, both of whom nodded encouragingly. Finally, he smiled. Okay, I'll do it. As Jason and his friends discussed the details of the campaign, Karen sat in her car in the mall parking lot, gripping the steering wheel tightly. Her humiliation was complete, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a twinge of self-reflection. She replayed the day's events in her mind, each moment a painful reminder of how far she had fallen in her own eyes. For years, Karen had prided herself on being outspoken and assertive, but today had revealed the darker side of those traits. She realized, perhaps too late, that her behavior had consequences, not just for others but for herself. With a heavy sigh, Karen started the car and drove away, vowing silently to be better. Whether she would keep that vow remained to be seen. In the weeks that followed, the once quiet mall transformed into a hub of excitement and activity. The Harris family's new campaign, titled Empathy Starts Here, began to take shape under Jason's leadership. Vibrant banners were hung from the ceilings, and the mall's social media pages lit up with announcements about upcoming community events. What had once been just another commercial space now carried the promise of something much more meaningful. Jason, who had always preferred to stay out of the spotlight, found himself stepping into a new role with surprising ease. Daniel had arranged for a professional team to help him prepare for public speaking engagements and media interviews. At first, Jason was terrified. Standing in front of a camera and addressing thousands of people was something he had never imagined himself doing. But with Emily and Ryan by his side, offering support and the occasional joke to lighten the mood, Jason began to find his confidence. I never thought I'd see the day when you'd be the face of a movement, Emily teased one afternoon as they walked through the mall. You used to get nervous just ordering food at a drive-thru? Jason laughed. Trust me, I'm just as surprised as you are. But it feels good, you know? Like I'm actually making a difference. Ryan nodded. You are, dude. And people are noticing. I heard some guys at school talking about how cool it is to see someone our age leading something like this. Jason smiled, but before he could respond, a mall employee approached him with a clipboard. Mr. Harris, we're ready for you at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. The ceremony was the official kickoff for the Empathy Starts Here campaign. A stage had been set up in the center of the mall, surrounded by a growing crowd of shoppers, employees, and local media. Jason stood at the podium, nervously adjusting the microphone as he looked out at the sea of faces. Thank you all for being here today, he began, his voice trembling slightly. When we started planning this campaign, I wasn't sure if I was the right person for the job. But then I realized that this isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about trying to make things better, one step at a time. The crowd erupted into applause and Jason felt a surge of pride. He continued, speaking about the importance of kindness, understanding, and standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. By the time he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the audience. Daniel stepped forward to present Jason with a commemorative plaque. Jason, you've not only made your family proud but also inspired an entire community. This mall is lucky to have you. Jason accepted the plaque with a wide smile, but his mind was already racing with ideas for the next phase of the campaign. He knew this was only the beginning. Meanwhile, Karen had been watching the ceremony from a distance, her presence unnoticed by the crowd. She had returned to the mall, driven by a mixture of curiosity and guilt. The events of that fateful day still haunted her, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she owed Jason an apology. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, Karen approached the stage cautiously. She found Jason talking to a group of volunteers and waited until he was alone before stepping forward. Jason, she said hesitantly. Jason turned to face her, his expression unreadable. Karen, I just wanted to say I'm sorry, she said, her voice trembling, for the way I treated you. It was wrong and I've been thinking about it ever since. Jason studied her for a moment, his eyes searching for sincerity. Finally he nodded. Thank you. That means a lot. Karen looked relieved, but Jason wasn't finished. Apologizing is a good first step, but if you really want to make things right, there's something you can do. Anything, Karen said eagerly. Just tell me. Join us, Jason said simply. Be part of the campaign. Help us spread the message. Karen's eyes widened in surprise. You'd let me do that? After everything? Jason smiled. This campaign is about empathy, remember? Everyone deserves a second chance. Karen nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. Thank you, Jason. I won't let you down. With Karen now part of the team, the campaign gained even more momentum. She worked tirelessly alongside Jason, Emily, Ryan, and the other volunteers, determined to prove that she had changed. Her transformation became a powerful story within the campaign, a reminder that it was never too late to choose kindness. The mall thrived under the new initiative, attracting visitors from across the city who wanted to be part of something meaningful. Local businesses reported an increase in sales, and employees said they felt a renewed sense of pride in their workplace. The Harris family's vision of a more inclusive and compassionate community had become a reality. As for Jason, he continued to grow into his role as a leader and advocate. He learned to embrace the spotlight, not for his own sake but for the cause he believed in. And with his family and friends by his side, he knew there was nothing he couldn't achieve. Months later, as Jason walked through the mall, he couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. The walls were adorned with artwork and messages of hope, created by local students and community members. The food court buzzed with laughter and conversation, and the air was filled with a sense of belonging. Jason stopped in front of a display that featured photos from the campaign, including one of himself standing at the ribbon-cutting ceremony. He smiled, feeling a sense of pride and gratitude. "Hey Jason," a voice called out. He turned to see Karen approaching, holding a tray of coffee cups. "I thought you could use a pick-me-up." "Thanks, Karen," Jason said, accepting a cup. "How's the volunteer work going?" Karen grinned. "It's the best decision I've ever made. And it's all thanks to you." Jason shook his head. "No, Karen. You made the choice to change. I just gave you the opportunity." As they stood there, sipping their coffee and watching the bustling mall, Jason realized that the campaign had accomplished something even greater than he had imagined. It had brought people together, showing them that kindness and empathy had the power to transform lives. And that was a legacy worth fighting for. The transformation of the Harris Mall didn't stop with community campaigns and visual upgrades. Jason had another idea, a program he called Generations Together. It was a bold initiative aimed at bridging the gap between young people and older generations, encouraging mutual understanding and learning. Jason believed that empathy started with listening, and what better way to foster that than through shared stories. One sunny afternoon, Jason and Emily sat in the food court, sketching out ideas on a large whiteboard. Emily tapped her marker against her chin thoughtfully. "Okay, so we've got a storytelling corner where seniors can share life lessons, and a mentorship program where teens help them with technology. What else?" Jason nodded. "We could also host workshops, crafts, cooking, maybe even dance classes. Something interactive to break the ice." Ryan, who had been eavesdropping from the next table, chimed in. "You should definitely do a gaming night. My grandma loves playing card games and she totally owns me every time." Emily laughed. "Your grandma sounds awesome. Let's add that to the list." The program quickly took shape, and before long, the mall was buzzing with excitement. Local schools and retirement communities signed up to participate, and volunteers began transforming an empty storefront into a cozy gathering space, complete with comfortable seating and a stage for performances. The inaugural event was a storytelling night, featuring seniors from the community who had volunteered to share their experiences. Jason was nervous as he took the stage to welcome the audience, which included everyone from toddlers to retirees. But as the first storyteller began speaking, a woman in her 80s recounting her journey as a civil rights activist, Jason's nerves melted away. The audience was captivated, hanging on every word as the woman described the challenges she had faced and the victories she had celebrated. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. One by one, other storytellers took the stage, sharing tales of love, loss, adventure, and resilience. When the final storyteller stepped down, Jason returned to the stage, his heart full. "Thank you to all of our storytellers," he said. "And thank you to everyone who came tonight. This is what Generations Together is all about, connecting, understanding, and learning from each other." The crowd erupted into applause, and Jason felt a sense of fulfillment he had never experienced before. Karen, who had thrown herself into the campaign with surprising zeal, played a key role in organizing the Generations Together program. She helped recruit volunteers, coordinate events, and even hosted a few workshops herself. Her transformation was nothing short of remarkable, and she quickly became one of the campaign's most dedicated advocates. One afternoon, as Karen and Jason worked on decorations for an upcoming event, she turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You know, I've learned more in the past few months than I have in my entire life," she said. "I used to think I had everything figured out, but I was so wrong." Jason smiled. "That's the thing about empathy. It changes you. And once you start seeing the world through someone else's eyes, you can't go back. Karen nodded, her eyes brimming with gratitude. Thank you for giving me the chance to change. I'll never forget it. Of course, not everything went smoothly. There were moments of tension, particularly during discussions about sensitive topics like race, religion, and politics. But Jason saw these challenges as opportunities for growth. He encouraged participants to approach these conversations with curiosity and respect, and over time, the atmosphere shifted from one of hesitation to one of openness. During one particularly heated debate about social justice, a teenage girl stood up and said, "I don't understand why people can't just agree to disagree." An older man in the audience responded gently, "Because some things are too important to compromise on. But that doesn't mean we can't listen to each other and try to understand where we're coming from." Jason watched the exchange with a mixture of pride and hope. This was exactly what he had envisioned, a space where people could learn from each other and grow together. The program soon gained attention beyond the local community, and one day, Jason received an email that left him speechless. It was from a well-known author and motivational speaker who had heard about Generations Together and wanted to visit the mall to see the program in action. The day of the visit, the mall was abuzz with anticipation. Jason and his team worked tirelessly to prepare, and when the visitor arrived, they were ready to impress. The author spent the day participating in workshops, listening to storytellers, and chatting with participants. At the end of the day, she pulled Jason aside. "This program is incredible," she said. "You've created something truly special here." Jason beamed. "Thank you. That means a lot. I'd like to help you take it to the next level," she continued. "How would you feel about collaborating on a book that shares the stories and lessons from Generations Together?" Jason's jaw dropped. "Are you serious? That would be amazing." The author smiled. "Let's make it happen." The collaboration led to a best-selling book that not only highlighted the stories from the program but also inspired other communities to start similar initiatives. Jason found himself in the national spotlight, giving interviews and speaking at conferences about the power of empathy and connection. But despite his newfound fame, Jason remained grounded. He continued to lead the campaign with the same passion and humility that had fueled it from the start. And as he walked through the mall, now bustling with life and laughter, he knew he had found his purpose. The Harris family's legacy was no longer just about business, it was about building a better world. And Jason was proud to be a part of it. Jason felt the wind shifting, both figuratively and literally, as the seasons transitioned. The once idle mall had become a thriving hub, alive with chatter and warmth. Every corner reflected a story, a connection, a moment of growth for its patrons. Yet, as things blossomed, Jason knew he had to prepare for the final leg of his campaign, the permanent integration of the values and principles into the structure of Harris Mall. One of Jason's most ambitious projects was establishing a fund that supported small businesses, particularly those from marginalized communities. He believed that the mall should not only be a safe space but also a platform for empowerment. This fund, called the Harris Initiative, aimed to provide grants and mentorship to aspiring entrepreneurs who lacked the resources to start or sustain their ventures. Emily and Karen were instrumental in bringing the project to life, using their networks and organizational skills to identify potential recipients. The first recipient was a young woman named Mia, who dreamed of opening a bakery that celebrated her family's Caribbean heritage. Her story moved the selection committee to tears. She had spent years perfecting her recipes but lacked the capital to secure a storefront. When Jason called to tell her the good news, Mia was speechless. This changes everything," she stammered. "Thank you. I won't let you down." Jason smiled. "We're not just investing in your business, Mia. We're investing in you. And I have no doubt you're going to succeed." The grand opening of Mia's bakery was a celebration like no other. The scent of freshly baked goods wafted through the air as a crowd gathered to sample her creations. Jason watched from a distance, his heart swelling with pride. This was exactly what he had envisioned, a place where dreams could come true. The success of the bakery inspired others to take the leap, and soon the mall was home to a diverse array of businesses, each with its own unique story. Jason made it a point to visit each one, learning about their struggles and triumphs. He wanted every business owner to feel seen and valued, and his genuine interest earned him the respect and admiration of the community. However, not everyone was on board with the changes. A small but vocal group of critics accused Jason of pandering and questioned his motives. Some even suggested that the fund was a publicity stunt designed to boost his family's reputation. Jason faced the criticism head-on, inviting skeptics to attend mall events and see the impact for themselves. One such skeptic was a local journalist named Ben, who had written a scathing editorial about the Harris Initiative. Jason reached out to Ben and offered to give him a personal tour of the mall, hoping to change his perspective. To Jason's surprise, Ben accepted. The tour was an eye-opener for Ben, who was struck by the genuine sense of community and collaboration he witnessed. He met business owners like Mia, who spoke passionately about how the initiative had changed her life. By the end of the tour, Ben was visibly moved. "I have to admit," he said, "I was wrong about you. This is extraordinary." Jason shook his hand. "Thank you for giving us a chance. That's all I've ever wanted, for people to see what's possible when we work together." The next day, Ben published a follow-up article that praised the initiative and acknowledged his initial bias. The article went viral, drawing even more attention to the mall and its mission. Jason was inundated with calls and emails from people who wanted to support or replicate the initiative in their own communities. Amid the flurry of activity, Jason made it a point to spend time with his family. His parents, who had initially been skeptical of his vision, were now his biggest supporters. They often joined him at events, beaming with pride as they watched their son transform the mall into a beacon of hope. One evening, as Jason and his parents strolled through the mall, his father turned to him with a serious expression. "Jason," he said, "your mother and I have been talking and we've made a decision. We want you to take over as CEO of Harris Enterprises." Jason was stunned. "Dad, I don't know what to say." His father smiled. "Say yes. You've proven yourself in every way. The company needs your leadership, your vision. You've made us so proud." Tears welled up in Jason's eyes as he hugged his parents. "Thank you," he said. "I promise I won't let you down." As the announcement of Jason's new role was made public, the community rallied around him, celebrating his achievements and looking forward to the future. Jason knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to face whatever challenges came his way. In the weeks that followed, Jason worked tirelessly to ensure that the values he had instilled at the mall would be upheld on a larger scale. He implemented new policies at Harris Enterprises that prioritized social responsibility and community engagement, setting a new standard for the company and inspiring other businesses to follow suit. Looking back on his journey, Jason felt a deep sense of gratitude. What had started as a simple act of kindness had grown into something much bigger than he could have ever imagined. He had learned that true success wasn't about wealth or power, it was about making a difference. And as he stood in the bustling mall, surrounded by the people whose lives had been changed, Jason knew he had found his purpose. Together they had created something extraordinary, a legacy of empathy, resilience, and hope.